but it's a good question.
How did you get involved in Hex and all that stuff? About the share rate, of course. How did you came up with the share rate? And then also, I think we have a lot of new viewers as well. That's why we're gonna ask questions like, what is the share rate and why was it implemented?
Good question.
And how does it work? So it's not based on the highest return of investment, right?
How did you I would like to address that kind of stuff because it's still like since an entire year, you know.
I think we have
it's a very common misconception.
Viewers
which
as well.
I know where it comes from.
Questions like, what is the share rate?
Why was I'll share some anecdotes about that. That seems good.
Then the third part would be how does the daily payout work?
Okay.
How does the payout get distributed to the staker class?
Okay.
And then about the simulations you did on the beginning of the year. We had this simulation where we said, okay, it could be possible to make an 80x in Hex for the next 10 years. And with new data, how would it be today?
Gotcha. Okay.
And the last two.
And I guess because the Mars is saying that he's already starting more or less. So we will start with just Ellen and me, and then we announce you, and then you can come on. So just a few minutes. Yeah.
Sure.
So den Hintergrund brauchen wir. Good. And you can start, Ellen.
Okay. Hi, guys. My name is Alan. With me is Patrick, the Hex Lion. We do our show, the Hex, the KRYPTOSPARBUCH show. Normally it is in German. Today we will do it in English. And from now on, we will always do one show a week in English so we can chat with our international community in the chat and also maybe bring somebody in the chat as well. Today we have a special guest. We have developer Kyle. Here in our interview, we will start in 5 minutes, and for the next 5 minutes, I would ask everybody to just like on YouTube and maybe send a chill link in your Twitter, so a lot of people can join the chat and know that we are interviewing Kyle, one of the most influential people in Hex. He developed the share rate and share price, and we're gonna ask him today a ton of questions, and you guys can also ask questions in the chat, so we're gonna ask Kyle about your question. So please, first of all, try to give the link to all your friends and people you would like to get to know in Hex, so we have a nice discussion. And in the next 3 minutes, we will start and bring Kyle into the show. Patrick, do you have something to say to our viewers already?
Yes, of course. I was just chilling the link that we are live now. Everything is working, it seems. So YouTube is working, DLive is working, Twitter as well seems to work. Everything perfect. Kyle is already in the background. Perfect that he made it today. I hope everybody is all right. Just tell us like from which country you're tuning in. I would be interested in like where all those all the people come from.
And I see we have already a lot of people in the chats. We have YouTube people and DLive people. We have Barely Crafty. We have Belly Brand. Luke is here already also. So nice. So we can go on with the stream in the next couple of minutes.
Exactly. So
I'm really excited for this one. We waited a lot of time to get Kyle on, and he finally made it possible for us. So this is gonna be really exciting today.
Yeah. So for the people who are tuning in already, I see a lot of Hexicans here. So just give us a shout out if you want to. Just forward the link. Say everybody that we are going to be live in 2 minutes with the founder of the share rate, with Steph Kyle.
Well, we have Moinyak Mitra. I grew up in Haryana, India. That is awesome. I think India is one of the biggest countries, not the biggest countries, but with the most people in the world. Yeah. So I always think, man, we have to get people, those people into crypto, you know, and then it could spread like fire when those people get into crypto, like Chinese people, Indian people. They are just so many over there. Kyle is the man. Yeah, Barely Crypto. Kyle is the man. You're right. Just shared your stream. Thanks, Bellied Brand. That helps a lot. Best developer is here ever, says Luke.
So, good, Alan. I think everything is working fine. Just rechecked again. All platforms, chat is working. Everything's fine. So I guess we can start here. No, I give you a small intro, and yeah, let's have an awesome talk here.
Hi guys, welcome to HEX, the Crypto Sparbuch Show. My name is Alan, with me is Patrick, the HEX Lion, and we do normally a German stream today, and for the next month we will do English streams once a week as well, and we have a special guest with us today, Kyle, one of the developers from HEX. You bring him on, Patrick, and we start the stream with him. Hi, Kyle. How are you doing?
Good day, I guess, since we're across time zones. I'm doing well. How are you both?
Nice. We're doing well as well. Really excited to have you here. And yeah, it's like 6 p.m. in Germany, but I guess it's like really early where you are, right?
10 a.m. For some people, particularly developers, that's very early, but I've been up for quite a while.
Nice. I think we have a lot of people here in the chat that already know you. Of course, you are really prominent in HEX. Everybody knows you, of course. But we also, since HEX is already 1 year old and got so many more users in the last months, maybe you can introduce yourself a little bit and what are you doing and what is your part in the HEX community?
Sure. I may go back a little further than that, just to talk about getting into crypto and how I came across HEX to begin with. So, as you mentioned, I've been a prominent member of the community, and that's been actually completely organic. So HEX was in development for at least a couple of years before it launched. I went through a whole bunch of devs before it finally found kind of the right person to put everything together. And I came across the project through a YouTube person and podcaster named Chris Coney. He talked about the project as being sort of an interesting sort of alternate take on crypto. The way that he framed it was its store of value for its own sake. It doesn't make any claims about trying to revolutionize the world or do peer-to-peer or do anything better. It just sort of eschews all of that high-minded stuff that a lot of other cryptocurrencies espouse and just goes after store of value, price performance. And I thought that honesty was very refreshing. I came into crypto for kind of unrelated reasons in 2016, 2017, when all the hype around ICOs and new coins and utility tokens was kind of the rage. I got to see hundreds of millions of dollars just sort of evaporate into thin air based on these promises. And then to hear this pitch that, yeah, we're not doing any of that, just store of value, just sort of the real digital gold and programmable money. I thought, okay, this is interesting. You know, I'll read about this. I came into the Telegram chat. I didn't know of Richard from anything prior. I didn't. I saw the picture with the top hat. That was my first introduction to Richard Hart, and just sort of read through what the project was, what it was supposed to do. Read through the contract, and thought it was interesting enough that, sure, I would put a little bit of money into this. And since I'm going to do that, I might as well write code in another language to kind of verify that it does what it says it will do and see if I can figure out an optimal strategy. Through that process, I was able to kind of engage with the community, answer questions, just as a layperson, not working on the project, not really anyone special, except that I could read the code and sort of confirm or disconfirm that it would do this or wouldn't do that, and just educate people. There were a bunch of people in the chat there before me who were kind of playing the same role as kind of power users in the community, just had a better understanding or a longer history with the project. And we discovered sort of collectively that there were a couple of things that were not working as intended with the contract as written. So most people don't know about this, but there were versions of the contract in GitHub for community review in like February or March of 2019. And using those, myself and a few other members of the community sort of picked at it and ran simulations. I think one guy was using like Python code to sort of simulate outcomes. I had a different thing in C#, and started this discussion about how to make the contract better and to do or fulfill the promises that were made on what it ought to do, not how price performs. I realize I said promises. Not how the price performs, but that it actually enforces the rules that it says it's going to enforce. I just stayed engaged, basically, and just kept picking at the problem and kind of working on it through the spring and through the summer and into the fall. I was involved in all the audit processes and helping the auditors kind of understand what the contract was supposed to do so that they could properly audit it and check the behavior themselves. I helped sort of liaise between the community and Richard and auditors and a whole bunch of devs that kind of came and went, bringing people up to speed, writing documents. There's a whole bunch of documents on Google Docs that I wrote that I think are featured on the website. And also there's sort of links all over the place, how to use Hex, what it is, how it works. Yeah, and then the project launched, and I've just continued kind of answering questions and trying helping out as much as I can, and here we are.
Nice. And let me ask you one thing, what you said in the introduction. You help people to verify that the code could do certain things and do not do certain things. Do you remember what those things were you explained to the people? Like
Sure.
what were some concerns maybe?
I tend to go into too much detail, so I'm going to try not to do that. The rules and the particulars of how Hex works have changed from the original concept over the course of a couple of years of development, and finally are in the form that they are now. There were a whole bunch of things that were different. So there was, for some time, there was no adoption amplifier. Like that was a new thing as of spring 2019. The way that Big Payday worked was quite different. The way that it was paid out was daily rather than, so there was a chunk a day rather than having a big payday at the end. There was no share rate at the beginning. There was a kind of a dependency on a particular behavior that was not realistic. Actually, the pay used to be weekly rather than daily. So there's a whole bunch of things that are different now than were then. So people would ask things about what happens with partial weeks, which isn't a thing anymore. Now we're doing daily payout calculation. The way the Big Payday was paid on the daily, people had questions about like how that worked, and don't you get into some kind of degenerate states? Turns out you do, which is why it's a big payday instead of paid throughout the launch phase. There were questions about the adoption amplifier. There was some back and forth about how referrals for the adoption amplifier worked. So I don't know that anyone actually did this, but it came up. How could you give credit to multiple referrals for an adoption amplifier day? That was actually possible. That is possible, or was possible, where you could use a ref link, put in 1 ETH, and then click another ref link, put in 1 ETH, and both of those people get their half of your referral, essentially. So that was all in there. People asked about that. There was some questioning about how to do Bitcoin claims, though, funny enough, there was almost no chatter about that post-launch. That was also heavily scrutinized during the audit. Never came up in the public's eye. So there was questions about a lot of things for the first 6 or 8 months. Once the rules all settled, the questions were actually exactly the same questions we still get today. How do I know that I'm not getting screwed by committing longer? How does emergency unstaking work? how do the penalties get put into the pool? You know, I mean, these are questions that I think will be familiar to everybody.
And those are the questions we're going to talk about later in the stream as well.
Hey, perfect.
But you are a software developer, right? So you
Yeah.
are able to read the code and like say, okay, Hex is a safe product and all that. And we Germans are all about security. In our chat, we talk about that a lot. So this will be the first section that we're going to talk about. What do you think is the best security for Hex? What can the user do to really secure his Hex for not get hacked and stuff like this?
That's a great question. I wish I had a better answer. So I think the standard answer for a long time has been hardware wallets. But there have been hacks and phishing attempts or phishing attacks, even through hardware wallets. I don't know that I can make a best practice recommendation, but what I can say is just generally, if you lose physical control of your keys or of your seed phrase, you're screwed. Like even a hardware wallet, they're, you know, what was it? Trezor has like a debug pin or something that if somebody has your wallet, even for a couple hours, they can hit the debug pin and dump your private key. Never trust anything emailed to you. So just default to not trusting. So if you get something from Ledger support, it's probably not really from them. I don't know. It's a good question because I think it's a moving target. I mean, security is generally a moving target. There's very little that we can do to protect people from themselves. People forget things, people lose things. There are mechanisms in the centralized world and in the fiat world that you can establish trust through a government ID. You can establish trust because the bank is a big building that you've been to. It's very unlikely that it's been swapped out with scammers overnight. The government can trust who you are because you have an ID, you have a passport. And crypto doesn't have that. Crypto is really an all or nothing endeavor. If you have the private key, you get to spend the money. The end. So if you have a system for yourself that you can not rely on your memory, and you can be reasonably sure of the physical security of the thing that you're trying to protect, that's kind of your best bet. And then your trust should only be reserved for people that you know in real life, you know, maybe a spouse or children. There's really not a one-size-fits-all solution. And as technology gets more sophisticated, the weak link will always be people and you know, attempts at social engineering or just gaining physical access to whatever device or paper or even the steel stamped cards that people use for seed phrases. It's going to be hard to answer that, you know, for all time.
So the first thing you mentioned was a hardware wallet. That is the most secure way to have your crypto, right? Of course, you should never forget your password, your seed phrase. That is the most important thing. But I want to ask you, because the Hex smart contract, you have to have a MetaMask. And what is the difference between a hardware wallet and MetaMask, for example?
Okay, that's a great question. So to back up a second, you actually don't have to use MetaMask. Somebody in the community implemented a direct integration to Ledger's API, and it's
is this the hard hex.xyz?
Yeah, that actually does not use the MetaMask API at all. It just uses the connection to your Ledger to your computer and just talks to the API through its secure APIs. So what makes a hardware wallet secure is that it is not online and you do not load software onto it. What people have lost, this has actually happened, people have lost control of their keys in the Hex community because of software. So if you have an internet connected device and you install software on it, it can report your activity. As an example, Mac laptops, Mac computers report every app that you launch back to Apple. And I think that's of concern to the privacy community because it's becoming a required call that your computer makes every time you launch an app. So what some people do before the advent or popularization of hardware wallets was that they have an air-gapped computer, and then they manually type in the stuff that they need to sign on that computer, and then take the output of that and then manually type it into an online computer so that the wallet computer remains offline and is not contaminated. You're giving it inputs that you know about, and you are taking its outputs and putting them out on the network. A hardware wallet is just basically a purpose-built device to try and do that. It doesn't go online. You just plug it in to basically send over an electronic bridge the thing you need to sign, and it spits out the thing that gets sent to the network without ever loading or sharing the key material. So MetaMask is different than both of those in that it is trusting your browser to sandbox what it does, meaning it's in a little walled garden, a software walled garden, and it can temporarily load your private key to use for some software operation and then spit out output back over the wall. That's a trust relationship. So you're trusting that the browser software is hardened enough that people can't interrogate or steal secrets from data that's in these little walled gardens. There's actually an open ticket with MetaMask that there is an unsafe way to use it. So you can tell it to load your keys into memory. And once you do that, the browser actually needs to have access to MetaMask's memory. So they have this open bug that you should never use this one MetaMask API to load a key in plain text, because then it becomes accessible by the browser, and malicious code on a web page could read it, could just read your key, for example. So MetaMask is a kind of a dangerous tool, to be honest, unless you're just using it for very standard things, like, going to known sites like hex.com or go.hex.com and signing very specific transactions with the little pop-up prompt. But trying to use the MetaMask APIs themselves is very dangerous. Don't do that. So stick to very paved path stuff that you know for sure works. In fact, actually, as a case in point, somebody asked me today about doing a claim, kind of similar to the Bitcoin claim, where you sign kind of an arbitrary message to prove that you control a key. He was asking if it was safe to do that for this other contract. And I told him I don't have time to audit the contract, but what's the message they want you to sign? If it's like some actual text string, like I am claiming my coins, that's probably safe. But what he sent me was just basically a string of characters that basically looks like a transaction. They're asking you to sign a transaction to claim some free stuff. But that transaction could be anything. It could be dump my ETH to some wallet. So even using kind of the standard flow of, hey, just sign this thing and everything will be all right. And MetaMask pops up and helpfully offers to, yeah, you want me to sign this thing? Yeah, go ahead, sign that. Maybe you just gave all your money away. Like you don't know. So again, security is a moving target. Social engineering is almost always the most effective way to part someone from their money, either getting them to do some non-reversible transaction via this sort of sign prompt, getting them to reveal a seed, getting them to load their keys into their browser in a way that you can then scrape through JavaScript. It's much easier than attacking the software surface.
So I think it's important to mention that the hardware ledger, for example, is safe. MetaMask is safe. It is the human that is operating it that can be attacked. For the ledger, for example, the hardware wallet, if you get a phishing email and you click on it and then stuff like this. With MetaMask, if you sign a transaction that isn't safe, and there you can get screwed. But you know what question I really get often? What is with people that just used MetaMask and went into go.hex to stake and do all that stuff, but now want to integrate their stakes into a hardware wallet? Is that possible somehow?
As far as I know, it's not. But I'm not totally familiar with everything you can do with a ledger. So
may I interrupt for a second?
please.
So, because I had the same issue, I had my MetaMask and my first stakes I did only on the MetaMask. And to increase my security, I took an old ledger and put the MetaMask key on this old ledger, and then I deleted my MetaMask account. So at least I have this key which was generated from the MetaMask a year ago, now in in the hardware wallet. And so I guess with this you can increase your security, because now there is no online wallet with this private key in the background, right?
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say, is that if Ledger allows you to import a key, a private key from MetaMask, then it will work. The more common version of that question is, I have stakes associated with an address, which is not a private key. It's a public address. Can I migrate them to a different public address? And the answer is no.
Yeah.
So we have different hardware wallets out there. Some have Bluetooth, some have not. Do you know if there's a difference between one that hasn't Bluetooth and then some that have no Bluetooth?
I distrust Bluetooth, so for a few reasons. Probably the most famous recent thing that I've seen published on Bluetooth is that the encryption protocol is very easy to attack. Apparently, a researcher proved this. Because Bluetooth needs to be compatible with a whole host of implementations of the stack, it allows you to respond to a request for an encryption handshake to establish a key, where you say, I want to use a key that is 1,000 bits long, so a very difficult to hack encryption key. And the other device can say, I can't handle 1,000 bits. And it says, okay, how about 900? I can't do 900. Can you do 100? I can't do 100. Can you do 8? Yeah, I could do 8. And so the attack is, you convince one device that it needs to use an extremely weak encryption key. And then you can easily brute force the key and then decrypt the communication. So I wouldn't trust a hardware wallet that uses Bluetooth. Because some other malicious device could convince it to use a very weak security key, and then any interaction, which you just as a user, you're not going to know what it's sending, supposedly encrypted across that Bluetooth connection. Yeah, so I wouldn't. The less connectivity, the better. That should be a rule of thumb. Don't trust anything where someone asks you for information, meaning like phishing emails or even phone calls, any of that stuff. And less connectivity is better.
Nice. Yeah, well, we have a lot of people that bought the new hardware wallet from Ledger that has Bluetooth now, and maybe they get a little unsecure now. So I would say just do not use the Bluetooth function. Just don't Bluetooth it with your phone, and just use it the old way, to stick it into your computer and use it that way, I guess, right?
Yeah, there's devices that are, security or privacy centric, tend to have hardware switches for these different connection mechanisms, so that you can physically disable the Bluetooth chip. So there's no way for anyone to even send a message to say, hey, by the way, turn on Bluetooth. Because if it's a software switch, meaning it's just waiting for some electronic signal to turn on or off, that's also, I think there's been research done on how to do that, like remote turn on cars, remote turn on Bluetooth radios, things like that. So yeah, less connectivity is better. Hardware switches are always better than software switches.
So this brings us a little bit to the mobile section. What do you think about the security on mobile phones? We have MetaMask on mobile phones right now as well, right?
Yeah, so I'm not an expert. However, so I used to work for Netflix, and so we had to do a lot with DRM keys. So not, it's not your personal wealth, but movie studios care very much that DRM works and that you can know things about the devices that play movies. Android in particular is very inconsistent across versions, across implementations, and across devices. I wouldn't trust using an Android phone personally. There's an awful lot of research you would have to do on particular models of phones, implementations of Android, implementations of the trusted hardware circuits that they put on those phones to do secure encryption. Apple has a track record of being better about isolating and protecting data with new versions. There were versions that were very insecure, where they opened basically an internal software bridge where you could ask for keys and encrypted material in plain text. So there were some attacks we had to deal with during my time at Netflix where we just didn't trust certain versions of iOS. Modern versions are much, much better, but then you are essentially trading security from hackers or from scammers for giving all your data to Apple. So that's kind of your pick.
Yeah, I heard about that. So Apple is like only one, how do I call it? Like one key, and Android has its 1,000 phones with 1,000 versions, and a hacker would have to implement like 1,000 hacks for like only one phone. But with Apple, it's really easy. You just develop one hack, and then you are basically into all Apple phones, right?
So it depends. You're right that the variety of Android implementations and devices can make that job harder. So there's a goodness, this phenomenon shows up a lot. It's kind of the case for diversity, like in either a genetic sense or in a defense sense, that it's easier to create a complex attack surface. Or, sorry, it makes it much harder for highly leverageable attacks. So if you have to make one hack for every phone, like let's say every phone was totally unique, so your hack is really targeting one person at a time. The issues that we've seen with Android are not necessarily device specific. Some of it is implementation specific. So many devices could share one common implementation that is attackable. And in particular, I think, was it? I don't remember if it was L or M, like the L series or M series of Android, had like a known defect with. Sorry, I'm just seeing in the chat. I'm scaring people. I'm not trying. It sounds much more complicated than it is. Don't share your information with people. Like that's it. That's the answer. And that, if you have to think about connectivity on your devices, less is better. It's really simple. So as I was saying, with Android, like there were a couple of known security modules that had an issue. So even if you don't know all the ins and outs, you don't have to make a hack that's specific to whatever, Nexus 2 Model 3 Android M. Like it's not as specific as that. If you can find a common component, I'll give a quick example in a second. If you can find a component that's attackable and that's common across a bunch of phones, then you just have to make a hack for that component, and you can get a pretty good sort of blast radius. For example, over the last several years, there have been vulnerabilities in a common open source package that does secure internet connections. I don't know if anyone would have heard of any of these, but they were discovered, and then it turns out like a huge number of companies use this open source package because it's very common. And so there's this reliance on using common software because you assume it's been tested and battle hardened. So you don't have this huge amount of diversity in what software people use because they tend to coalesce around the things that everyone else is using. So in the case of this software package, Netflix and a bunch of other large companies, including Amazon, who revealed the problem. I'm thinking of one in particular. Basically, all had to upgrade like right away to this new patch version, and it's not clear if any hacks had been committed. And so that was just sort of, okay, do the upgrade. Now let's wait and see if there's any evidence that anybody exploited the software package, while it was vulnerable. So it's kind of double-edged. With Mac, if you find one hack, it'll work on all iPhones. Like the what was the FaceTime bug where you could remotely enable somebody's camera, and it worked for all phones as of some software patch. Like that's obviously a very high leverage attack because you figure it out once, and because Apple phones are so uniform, it works for all of them. Android and other software like that is more diverse, so it's harder to find like a silver bullet kind of attack. But if you know what you're going after, which is security software or encryption software, then you really only need to attack that, and that probably is quite common across phones because of this phenomenon of people trying to consolidate on canonical versions of security software, because the assumption is we harden the one package and then everyone can use it. So the whole operating system and the phone may be very diverse, but there's some core components that they rely on this sort of coalescence around one version.
So we talked about the security today a lot, for like 30 minutes already, and I want to go away from security, even though it is a really important question, and all our German followers, they really love those questions. That's why we took much time for that. But now I would like to go on to Hex and ask things about Hex, and the most prominent thing you are known for is the share rate. You came up with the share rate, right? And how did you came up with it in the first place?
So I'm not going to take full credit for that, though I think I understand it the best. I'm not going to take full credit. So a little bit of history. I'll try not to be too long-winded about it. The problem that this started with is the claim that Hex, longer stakes always pay better than shorter stakes. That's the fundamental claim. And even with all the changes, that was the core proposition of the project. You lock up your coins, and if you lock longer, you are rewarded more than someone who locks shorter. It has to work that way. People must be completely confident that that works. Otherwise, the core principle of locking up your coins for a long time, reducing market supply, price go up, all the Richard isms, that will be undermined. If somebody finds a way to stake shorter so that they have liquid hex to sell anytime they want, and they have an advantage over people who've locked up and sort of given up that timing advantage, then all the faith in the project is gone. So that core claim that longer pays better has to work. And we looked at a zillion ways to make that happen. There was all kinds of mechanisms to like defer when shares pay. There was, so we're going to talk about the simulation later. But frankly, the simulator, once it revealed some particular problem, I almost entirely repurposed it to experimenting on how to make this longer pays better thing work. So early on, someone in the community suggested doing, his handle was Greg. I think it was just Greg. And he's a very sharp dude. He did a lot of the same simulations I did, though not as like random, but just sort of simpler ones. And he said, well, you should just do compounding. Like just do compounding how like a normal compounding interest investment works. We looked at that, and it was just super complicated about how to have people interact with the contract all the time. like manually compounding, because nothing is automatic on Ethereum. You can't automatically compound everybody. So then it just becomes very high touch, which is kind of runs counter to the idea that you just sort of stake and then forget about it. If you have to be engaged and like constantly hitting a button, like that doesn't work. He proposed that you could do the reverse by just basically slashing the benefit that latecomers get. And that was sort of the first way that the idea was phrased. So he gave some examples, like if you slash the reward that latecomers get, you can sort of achieve this compounding effect without touching. So that was 1.1. How you can reduce the benefit to later people and get the same compounding effect as if everybody is touching the contract all the time. But then that sort of fizzled out because it didn't handle bonuses. It didn't do anything. It didn't quite work. Also, it showed really extreme returns differences given the rules at the time. So when I mentioned before the big payday used to be split over every day, this created a situation, those two things together, where early people are rewarded daily. And if you come later, you've missed out on some number of days of reward, and you're slashed so that early people are compounded. It showed this ridiculous difference. Like a day one person could make 1,000x over the first year, and a day two person would make 500x. So one day, if you just hear about the project a day late, you lose like half versus the guy yesterday. So there were a bunch of things about that original idea that didn't work. Moving along, we were trying all kinds of different ideas. Richard kind of floated this idea of highest ROI. He said, well, so all we have to do to make sure that the new guys don't get paid more than old guys is that when that the old guy, or that the new guy has to basically buy the ROI of the old guy. And so if he has to buy in at some higher rate, then that will naturally slash his benefit. So then we thought, okay, maybe we can put a price on shares, because at first shares were just 1-to-1 always. There was no sort of conversion factor. It was always just take your hex, directly converts to shares, and then you convert it back to hex later. So we sort of combine these two ideas, like, okay, so we have some sort of price mechanism, and there's something about ROI, and maybe we can sort of put those together, and that will get us the effect we want. And that, it still didn't quite work. There were like edge cases where big short stakes could beat long stakes when they shouldn't be able to. So the dev who did all of the contract code that's in production added kind of the final element to correct for that one issue, which was changing the way that that ROI is calculated. So it's not strictly ROI, like it's not comparing it to what you made before. It just looks forward and says, if you restake under the same parameters, how do we keep your shares constant? Which was sort of the final sort of correction that was needed to make this thing work in a very smooth way. There were a couple other sort of tweaks in there. So like I think I tried it both when you start a stake versus when you end a stake. So it's actually not quite compounding as you would expect, because it only happens on end stake rather than daily. So there's no guarantee that you're turning over the whole Coinbase every day. It's only when stakes end. So there's a couple tweaks here and there, but with the original inspiration of you can do this compounding by slashing newcomers, can we key it off of like ROI somehow? And then the one refinement on that idea of changing ROI to only be forward-looking, meaning if you stake under the same parameters, just hold shares constant. And then I wrote some proof code in this tool called Wolfram Alpha to make sure that there's no circumstance where that will be violated. Like the invariant is you never get more shares than you started with under the same same staking parameters. We submitted that to the auditors. They had like a math PhD guy look it over, write it up in formal math, and prove that it was so. So it was like 6 or 8 months to come up with the right mechanism to do share rate. And this is all because of that fundamental guarantee that longer stakes must always pay better than shorter stakes.
Awesome. You answered the question really well, big. You already answered all the question I had about the share rate, but you said
I would have one more, and because it was very technical, and some peoples in the chat are new to Hex and not that far in the rabbit hole already. So could you please give us an example, like, because there is still the narrative that the highest 5555 stake will set the share rate in 2036,
Yeah. So yeah, I did kind of gloss over sort of the key difference from that. So let's back up. The thing that has to be true is that short stakes will never beat long stakes in terms of how much hex they get back. So one way that you can hopefully sort of intuitively guarantee that is that if I have 100 shares and you have 50 shares, and it's because I staked way longer than you did, the way that we know for sure that you'll never do better than me, meaning if you stake and then you restake and then you restake and then it all adds up to the same time that I did, the way that we can know for sure that you'll never gain ground on me is that if you restake for the same amount of time, your shares won't go up. So if you can do, like, let's imagine the opposite. If you have 50 shares and you know a trick to stake for a short period of time to get 51 shares, well, then you could just do that trick again and get 52, and do that trick again and get 53. So you're gaining ground on me by doing something that we're trying to discourage. I should always win if I stake for longer than you. Same amount of hex, and I just stake longer than you. I should be, just ahead of you forever. As long as I keep staking longer, meaning my time comes up, I restake for that same long period. And no matter how many little stakes you get in between, as long as you never get more shares each cycle or each iteration, then you can never catch up to me, and the guarantee will hold. Whether it's for 100 days, 1,000 days, 5,000 days, we have a way to guarantee that you never gain ground. So how do we do that? Well, the computation to figure out what you need to pay to get your shares always should just be what you need to pay to get your shares back. So if I cash in 50 shares, all I have to do is figure out what to charge you to get 50 shares back. And that's easy because I know how much hex you just got. So if you put in some amount of hex and you get back 10% more, or 10 times more, or 100 times more, or 80% more, or 80% less because you have a penalty, I can figure out what price to charge you to get your shares back. So if you made 2x, well, I just have to charge you double what I charged you last time, and then you'll get exactly the same number of shares back. If you got 50%, I just need to raise the price 50%, etc. So no matter what you exit with, I can just figure out what to charge you to get back in at exactly the same position. That way you're not gaining ground and you're not necessarily losing ground, you're just sort of repeating. Now, the trick with share rate is that in the case that I gave where, say, you only get back 80% because you have a penalty, I'm not going to lower the price for you. I'm just going to keep the price where it is. Or if you make 50% and someone else has already doubled the price, I'm not going to lower the price for you. So you're not able to buy back in at the same amount of hex, same time frame. So it's really just about managing that price so that no one can ever get more shares for the same commitment. So just think of it that way. The thing that is held constant is that a commitment yields this many shares. And then once you end your stake, that commitment of time has to yield the same number of shares. And we just compute the price to make that true. So even after 5,555 days with a max size stake, somebody makes 100x, and then they take all those gains and they restake them for 1 day. Well, the next day they have made some amount of money. Maybe it's 1/10%. But if you raise the price 1/10% to match those gains, it's not the highest return anyone's made, even that they made yesterday. But it means that they can't gain ground on somebody who staked 5,555 days halfway through their stake, right? So you have to think sort of across long periods of time. If they staked day one, and then someone else comes along in 5 years and stakes for 5,555 days, then the original person shouldn't be able to catch up to them either, right? Like it needs to be constant for everyone, sort of across all of time. So it's not ROI. Just think of it as a price. The price changes to sort of match to keep the commitment constant.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I never thought about it that you compute it this way, that you look forward. I was always thinking, okay, they knew the data back and then they just hire the price, but it's actually not like this. You just look for every single person to not get ever more shares when they stake again, and then you have to look forward for the next what could they done, right?
Yeah,
like you did the example for 1 day even.
Exactly. And Alan, before you want to move on to the next section, Kyle, you know the future staking chart, right?
Mm-hmm.
More or less. And there is like in the end of every year, so like in end of November, December, there is one large stake. And I know from the beginning that those stakes were made in the first 2 weeks of the existence of HEX.
Mm-hmm.
So are those stakes going to set a new share rate every year, and will that lead to a spike maybe in the share rate or not?
Probably. It's hard to say for certain, but I think that is right. So the earlier you start, and when you get out to fairly long time frames, the size sort of diminishes in value. I think like it maxes it at 10%, but you can match that with like just an extra 6 months, right? The way that the math works out.
Yeah, but still you get the 1.1x for bigger pays better.
Yeah,
so
that's what I mean.
That's my background of thinking it might spike for like something below 10%, because if this is the biggest, longest, earliest stake always, and the max out is 10%, so they may get like 8-9% more than the stakes they are competing with.
Yeah, that's right. So so your thinking on that is right. All I was trying to mention is not to scare people, because you can defeat that relatively small advantage by just pushing out 6 months on your commitment.
Yeah, I mean,
that's all I mean, is that you can overcome it relatively easily, and that's by design.
Yeah, the background is, if somebody asks me like, okay, how to build up a ladder, and I want to build up like 15 individual stakes that I have like one stake for every year possible on the timeline, then I am recommending ending your stakes before that large stake. Because the first reason is it could be sold afterwards. And the second reason is because if you want to restake, if you end your stake before the large one, you can restake for a better share price.
Yeah, that's good. That it feels a bit like a micro optimization, because it will be a few percent, but that adds up. I mean, that's reasonable. That's reasonable advice to give people.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
I think it adds up to a lot. Just comparing the number one, the day one staker who paid like 10,000 hex for one t-shirt and today you have to pay 16,000 hex for one t-shirt. So it's 60% more already,
Yeah.
right? And I think this is paid out daily. I think it just makes out a lot for the next
No,
15
it
years, for
definitely
example.
adds up. I mean, especially if you're going long, right? Because then you've added, sorry,
Yeah,
subtracted,
that's like
8% of your cash.
the idea of that. Because if I have a ladder with 15 stakes every year, I can, after 1 year, I unstake it, and the principal I restake to the end of my ladder.
Yeah,
And so I
I've
can.
seen that system. I think that works well. Like there's a little bit of ramp up time to get
Mhm.
yourself on this cadence, but then you're always having max bonus. Basically, you build up to max bonus forever.
Exactly, yeah. That's the idea behind it, yeah.
So when we started talking about the share rate, you said somebody in the community said you could just do compounding interest, and then the user would have to interagate with the smart contract every day, but this was not possible. But still, we have a compounding interest in Hex, right? So can you maybe explain how the compounding works?
Sure. So there's two ways to generate the same curve. So a compounding curve starts by looking very flat, and then it starts to sort of go in a J shape up. And the reason it does that is the math for compounding. It's all about doubling time. So the time to double your value. And that just starts to look more extreme. So if you go from 1/2 to 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16, the jumps start to get bigger because doubling looks more dramatic. But the other way that you can simulate that is you start at 1 and then you do the compounding logic as a fraction of 1 instead. So instead of making the number bigger in that pattern, you make the number smaller in sort of the opposite pattern. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so like we had it before the update with the share rate, where we started at 1 hex equals 100 million shares, and right now we are displaying it as hex price per T share. No?
Right, because you're less than 1. And in fact, every stake that ended reduced it a little bit. It became much more noticeable after BPD, but it was happening all the time. And it looks nearly linear. Excuse me. But if you zoom out, you see that you're actually going on a schedule of halvening time rather than doubling time. And it's a fairly long cycle, which I'm sure we'll talk about average stake length a little bit later. But the effect of compounding works if you do it that way, where you reduce newcomers on the same schedule that somebody would be compounding if you did it the other way, with a very high touch way. So that's what share rate is meant to mimic, is that instead of having somebody hit the button to compound themselves, when somebody exits, it tells the contract, okay, reduce the shares per hex by a little bit, and that's going to mimic the curve, basically the inverse of the compounding curve. So that's how you get compounding, is by reducing new people essentially on the same schedule that you would compound old people.
Well, I think the compounding effect is one of the best things in Hex, with the share rate, of course. And have you ever seen something like the share rate and share price working together in crypto and any other crypto? Is there something like, you can stake other crypto as well, but is there anything like else Hex?
Nothing that I've seen. And I mean, granted, I haven't been, I'm not super steeped in the thousands of projects out there. But I did look into an awful lot of them that were trying, let's see. No, the short answer is no. I've not seen anything done like this. So the schemes that are out there that are common, there's two of them. One is that the network or the coin is attempting to be proof of stake. And the way that they do that is not through compounding and interest, but through essentially validator rewards. That you're staking your coins and it gives you a small percentage chance to do some work for the network. And then when you do that work, you're rewarded. And the monetary policy is where they just set how much they reward people. But then it's random. So over time, you'll experience 5% gains or whatever, because you'll get a chance to get the reward a small percentage of the time, and then they just tune that reward and it mimics 5% interest. So that's one scheme. That's not code mediated. That's not a smart contract. That's network rules. So it's sort of like Bitcoin mining has network rules for what to reward miners. The other scheme are these financial products, something like Compound, or there's a zillion of them. Compound is a fairly well-known one, where, again, a company is setting a rate based on supply and demand curves. It's not a sort of smooth compounding interest function like what we have, where nobody has to touch it. Nobody has to do anything to it. It will just work forever. This is people either trying to write an algorithm to fine-tune like a supply-demand curve. Actually, DYDX, which is a derivatives platform, they do something like this. They have like an interest function that computes the instantaneous interest rate. Again, it's not a smooth curve. It's they have admin keys, so like they've swapped out this interest function as they've noticed people sort of hacking the system. It's like high touch. It's still high touch by people making decisions on what the rate ought to be. So in both cases, it may be programmatic, meaning that a computer program is deciding what to pay you, but it's not something you could have a mathematician like write a formula for, and then you publish it, and then it's just true forever. And that's what Hex has.
Exactly, and that brings us to the next section, the payout. Because of the share rate is so efficient, it seems to me that is why it's possible in Hex to make so many APY, to make so many gains. And this brings us to the question, how does the payout work in Hex?
Sure.
Yeah, I just want to interrupt pretty quick. Thanks, guys, for all the followings, all the diamonds, all the things on DLive. We are also streaming on YouTube and on Twitter Live. So thanks for coming on the stream today. And yeah, I hope you like it. Just give us a follow, a subscribe, whatever you want to. And thank you. Just let's move on, Kyle. So please. Okay. Explain us how the interest works in Hex.
Sure. So people commonly refer to it as interest. And then they get a little confused because they talk about the inflation, like inflation is a problem. So the way Hex works is that the contract mints new coins to pay people who are owed Hex. Just the very simplistic model. If you are owed Hex, it mints coins to pay you. The way that works in practice is that the contract knows how many Hex have been minted ever. So every time it mints coins, it has a track of that balance of sort of the total number that are in circulation. And then when you stake coins, this is sort of a technical detail. So if people are not technical, this isn't a super important distinction. But when you stake coins, they are burned. They're removed from that total number in existence. But then it separately keeps track and says, Hex Lion has burned 100 coins for staking. So the total supply is reduced by 100, but the sort of virtual supply is increased by 100. The way that it pays people is the same as inflation. That's not a great way to put that. Every day that somebody interacts with the HEX contract, it checks the supply, meaning both real and virtual, and calculates how much it needs to inflate that day to be on track to inflate at 3.69% a year. So,
just a quick question here. You say the real and the virtual hex, because I was arguing with some people, like, what is the basement of this daily calculation? Is it all ever minted hex, or is it all hex in existence?
it's all ever minted.
Yeah.
And
So
this is
like today's payout is not increasing the basement of this daily calculation.
yeah,
Only
because it's not
if
minted yet.
stakes get minted.
That's right. So the contract, to understand this, there are a lot of minutia. So there's the hex that have been minted and are in circulation and can be sent to people. They can be sold on exchange, whatever you want. And then there's hex that have been staked. Those are burned, meaning that the contract removes them and then records how many it removed. So again, if Hex Lion stakes 100 coins, that's subtracted from the total number that exists, but added to this virtual accounting that there are 100 staked. And then every day, when somebody first touches the contract, it says, okay, it's a new day. How much hex is there between all the hex that is staked, so all the virtual hex, and then all of the real hex in existence? And if I want to inflate at 3.69% per year, how much do I need to inflate today to be on track for that? And then it has a number that it uses. It's like 0.009955% or something of that total. And it says, okay, so here's the number I need to inflate today to be on track for that much, for that annual inflation rate. So it takes the daily inflation rate that it needs to do so that it's on track to hit an annualized rate of 3.69. And then it takes that number, we'll say that's the daily inflation, and it records it. And it says, okay, today the inflation number needed to be X, some number. And it just does that every day. And so every day you have this string, it's stored on the network, but you have all of these buckets. Today, the number needed to be this because I had this many hex. So it doesn't actually record the daily. It doesn't snapshot that. It snapshots some other things, but every day it takes a snapshot of key data so that it can do all the payouts correctly. But the important one for your question about inflation and payments is that it records what the inflation needs to be on that day to hit this annualized rate. So if it minted it immediately, then we would be inflating at 3.69%, but those tokens wouldn't be owned by anybody because it just has to mint them into the air. So instead, it just makes a note of what that number ought to be. So if it needs to be 100, it just says, okay, on December 3rd, it needed to be 100. On December 4th, it needed to be 101. On December 5th, it needed to be 102. Then, when you end your stake, when anyone ends their stake, the contract knows when you started, and it knows when you ended, and it just walks through each of those snapshots and says, okay, the inflation needed to be 100. How much of that do you get? Then it uses a different part of the snapshot, which is how many total shares existed on that day. And then it says, okay, so there were 1 million shares total. You had 1,000 shares on that day. So you get 1/1000th of that inflation number. And so it says, okay, so add, 0.1. So 1,000th of 100 is 0.1. So for December 3rd, you get 0.1. Let's go to the next day. You get 0.101 because you get 1,000th of the 101 and then 1,000th of the 102. And the reason it's snapshotted is because stakes can start and stop every day. So that million number is going to move. So as more people stake, that million goes up, and then you have a smaller percentage. As people end stake and their shares go down, that million may go down, and then your 1,000 is a larger percentage. So your daily payout is going to be different every day. So it has snapshotted how much it needs to inflate for the day. And then when you end stake, it figures out how much of that day you are entitled to. And at the end of walking through all these days, it has a total. And that total is your accrued interest over the course of your stake. So then it takes your original principal, the virtual hex that it made note of, and that it is added to this payout that you've earned, and then that is returned to you. The virtual number is reduced, the real number is incremented, and now we're kind of back to normal. You've sort of taken your principal hex out of the void of virtual hex, and you've gotten your payout. We recompute the share rate based on that total to make sure that our price is correct, so that if you restake, you'll be neutral, and then you're done.
Well, thank you, Kai. This is like really, really technical, and you're doing a great job explaining it really easy, so you can really picture it every little single step. And you know what I think about hex, about something really static. If the share rate is this, I try to think, okay, just slash it and divide it to 365, and then you have your thing. But that's not like this at all. It is like really, really dynamic. It's calculating every day and actually looking at the behavior of the stakers, and then that's how the everything is paid out, right? Yep. So it's like a really, really lovely mathematical system hex is. It's awesome.
Yeah. I also have a follow-up question to this. So because if we just say, okay, the total supply of hex is 600 billion, and I want to know like how much inflation in total there will be in one year, I can't just multiply that by 3.69%, right?
That's right.
Because that's not correct, no? So
that's right.
Do you know like how we can calculate the future interest, like in total what will come?
Off the top of my head, no. What I think you would need to do is you can check the commitment dates that everybody has said they will live up to. Figure out all of the stakes that are going to end between now and then. Figure out what their payouts would be. Like you may need to do projections into the future, but you could do that. If you assume nobody does anything except what they said they will do, and nobody stakes new, you can figure out what their payouts ought to be, and then basically run through the steps that I just mentioned one at a time. Like write a program to go through every day, make the bucket, snapshot what all the values should be, given that there's no changes, nobody's done anything. And then once you get to a day that someone end stakes, run their end stake, figure out what they're paid, change the supply. So then when you snapshot the total supply for inflation purposes, it's actually correct. And if you do that, you could have an estimate. But that estimate becomes invalid the moment somebody does something with the contract. If they emergency end stake, the outcome will be different, because some of their hex is going to go to the payout pool, some of it's going to be minted to the OA. They're going to get some back. They may restake it, they may not. Shares have changed, so everybody's share of that is now going to be different. It's very dynamic. So you can make guesses, but it's based on people's behavior. And in fact, that is the simulator that I wrote. So that's how I wanted to find what the best strategy would be, is have people act essentially randomly with some constraints, like have a person who's likely to stake for 5 years, and then just have them just keep doing that again and again. Have another person that stakes every 2 weeks just because. And then take all of these different people, or fake people, and have them just do the behaviors at their random intervals, and then just walk through days and see what happens and do what the contract does. And so we're not there yet. I'm going to try and move us along because I only have about 20 minutes left. So the simulator just did this, except instead of using real behavior and real data, I was just sort of pretending what people would do. But that's the only way. The only way to know is to actually do all the computations at those times, even if you have to guess what happens between now and then.
Yeah, that is something we would go on to the next question is like you made simulations in the past where you said, okay, a 10-year stake could do 80x in hex, and this was way back when you did that, and you even wrote a simulation like you said, and it's all based on the behavior of the people. So now we have like 1 year of hex is done, we have new data, interesting stuff happened, like people actually unstaked and took a hit and even staked for longer, so something you could never thought about it. And do you made new simulations with this all new data and all this new behavior you got? Do you have new numbers for us?
So I don't. A lot of people ask me about this, and I think what folks don't know or weren't thinking about that I was doing was the original purpose was to make sure I knew what the contract was doing and that it would do what it said it would do. And then it became important as I was trusted more within the community to validate that certain things would be true that were claimed, like longer pays better. And then when we discovered that wasn't the case, it became a really useful tool to test out rule changes. What if we did this instead of that? What's the outcome now? And then finally, to validate that we had the rules right and that what came out at the other end, we can get some rough numbers. Like, given a world where 5% of Bitcoin claimers claim and the adoption amplifier looks like the EOS launch phase, here's kind of what would happen, given some assumptions. So we got some, so it was useful for me personally, and then it revealed some issues, and then it was a great testing tool, and then it was a good validation tool, and then it was basically just coming up with some sort of course level points for people to glom onto to sort of make it real for themselves. Of like, yeah, but what does that all mean? It means in 10 years, you know, if you're committed and most people aren't, then you're going to make 80x, and they're not. But after that, and once we proved that the rules worked, it's totally about personal decisions for time horizon. And we know for sure that it will work. You just have to pick if you want to take the 5-year gains or the 10-year gains or the 15-year gains based on your personal circumstance. It actually ceased to be important to me because now I know the rules do what they say they will do for sure. So fantasizing about 80x or 20x or 100x ceases to be relevant. Making the project connect with people, bringing people on board, and having total faith that it's going to do what it was programmed to do is really what's important. And I just don't get anything out of fantasizing about the big numbers. Right? For me, it's like, okay, I can put this down because it served its purpose, and its purpose changed through the year or so, you know, leading up to launch. But I can put it down now, and so I haven't. And sorry.
Yeah, but actually, you know that a lot of people are taking those numbers and thinking they are like fixed numbers, as we have seen like 4 days before the big payday, they saw 250x, and then they were like all sad, you know, why it's just 30%? It's say 250 a few days ago, and so on. Yeah. So that's the thing with it, yeah. And because if we calculate the wrong inflation, the wrong future inflation by just calculating it with the basement right now, 0.3 times 3.69%, and for 10 years, So this is like the maximum amount of inflation, or
Right. So the contract targets
below.
an annualized rate of 3.69,
And if I
and it will never be that high. That's a ceiling. That's a hard ceiling on what the actual inflation rate will be.
Okay, because this number is a bit over 300 billion in 10 years. And if you just look what is staked out for 10 years at least, it's, I don't remember the number, but it's like 6 billion hex, something like that. And if you just divide those two numbers, you can't make like 80x for each and every 10-year stake, which is in place right now.
Yeah, so I think a couple of people in the community have mentioned that, and somebody shared a spreadsheet with me. So so let's talk about the things that are different and the reason that might be. So the scenarios that I was running assumed a fairly broad distribution of people's stake lengths. So you have very few people staking long and very few people staking short, and a lot of people staking somewhere in between. It's, 90 days to 6 months or a year, 2 years, maybe some 5-year people, and then it kind of trailed off.
Had a average staking length of just 2 years, right?
That's right. So when you aggregated it all up, and then it got a little bit more ridiculous when I threw in the adoption amplifier simulation, and you have people with really large short stakes and some lucky days and some unlucky days. All that said, what came out in the wash is that the average stake length, I think, was 2 years, and then the average weighted stake length was actually shorter than that. So people with like large amounts at the beginning or with short stakes kind of pull that average lower. So that's not what really happened. What really happened is the average is closer to 5 years, and that's weighted average, meaning a huge amount of the coins in existence that are staked for 4 years or longer, or 3.5 years or longer to pull that average up. And as a result, they're splitting with everyone else who's doing that at kind of an even rate. So you may, in fact, experience a much lower multiplier on your stack. It's still way better than the advertised interest rate of just under 4%, but it's much lower if you set your expectations on that 80 or the 80x or 100x. The curve looks the same. So I think that's the other thing people don't understand. That big payday in my runs was like 2 or 3x your stack, but it's actually 30%. And then I was showing 80%, and it's actually, or 80x, and the reality is going to be closer to 25 if nothing changes. But the curve looks the same. It's
if
still
nothing changes, it's still more than 25. Yeah, based on our.
I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm just throwing out what somebody told me.
Because if nothing changed, the whole share pool would rearrange itself, in after the average staking length. So
yeah.
So that's why then you get those X's. But like, maybe to give people a feeling that it's not about that you need to make like 80x ROI. So what happens to the hex price if we make lower?
Yeah, so the pitch, I think I mentioned this early on. There's two core pitches to Hex. Now I'm going to rephrase that. The core pitch is that everything is meant to encourage you to take coins off the market. So supply goes down, demand remains constant, price goes up. That's like economics 101. Suppressing the supply means staking for longer, or having it in dead wallets, people who lose their keys or whatever. So the system has to make you want to stake longer, and it does that through the longer pays better bonus, and that is provably better to stake longer if you want more hex at the end. So if you take more coins off the market for longer, meaning more people have committed their coins for longer periods, there's fewer on market, so you've further reduced supply for a longer period of time. if the premise is correct that you can get people aware of Hex and get them to care about it and get them to buy it, then you've only decreased the supply more, which means the pressure on price, on USD prices, should be higher. This isn't like a projection or an estimate on my part. It's the principle at work. So the idea is reduce supply. If you know that all the coins you could possibly buy are not available to you for 5 years, that's a long time. Like that's if you only had to wait 2 weeks for someone to end their stake and then you could buy their coins from them because they need to make a car payment, that is, you know, you'd hold out. You'd hold out for that and just pay a lower price. But if you know that there are no coins available for at least 5 years, if you don't act now, then you will need to pay what it takes to get in. So that's the principle. Reduce supply. The longer that supply is suppressed because those coins are committed to the contract, the fewer there are for you to buy. So the more you have to pay to buy them. So in theory, your USD gains will be better. This was another very frequent topic of conversation. What is hex inflation? Like, what does that mean? How does it compare to USD gains? I don't have any estimates on any of that. I know what the principles are, and that seems to be working as intended. A lot of coins are not available for purchase.
Since we only have 10 minutes left, I would like to ask a couple more questions, and we just make it really short in answer.
I'll do
and
my
then
best.
we maybe try to take some questions from the audience as well. So my first question would be, what would you really like to see built on top of Hex? Like, we have the Staker app, we have a lot of community pages, but what would you like to see built on Hex?
I think Staker app is kind of the right direction. I think mobile is probably the way to go. There, I don't know that I have a great intuition about this. I know folks have been trying to build other projects sort of on top of Hex, and that's actually very hard to do, and it's hard to reason about, like how to incentivize the use of Hex for some other secondary project that isn't just kind of an afterthought. Like, as case in point, somebody had the idea, oh, what if you did like something like DLive or a streaming service, but you tip in Hex instead of lemons or a Hive or whatever the coin is, the underlying coin. And, you know, my response is like, well, that's, you know, your first challenge there is to build a streaming service. And then what does it do? What streams video? Well, that's really hard all by itself. And how is Hex involved? Oh, you tip with it. But that's like a trivial sort of add-on kind of thing. Or people building kind of secondary products on top of Hex to do other financial stuff. But again, it's like very complicated to get the incentives right that align with the idea that everything we do should try to positively affect one of the two mechanisms on which we're making gains: stake more for longer or buy it on market to drive the price up. And aligning a product with those two incentives is very difficult. And if you do it wrong, you're not going to get community traction, because the community cares about those two things. So there have been a couple projects that shall remain nameless, but that got a lot of flack because they were raising funds and not using them in service of those two goals. So you can get community backlash. So that's what makes it hard. And it makes it hard for me to answer your question, to intuit what would even be a good thing to build on top, because anything I throw out there is kind of subject to a lot of nuance. How do you build the thing and stay aligned with those two incentives? And that's really, really difficult. And we have lots of examples of over-the-top products, particularly financial ones, that end up undercutting the original thing. So it's sort of hard to say what I would want to see.
Yeah. One question in the chat I just saw, and I thought it's really, really interesting. What was it like to work with Richard Hart?
Oh, he's great. Like I said, I didn't know him from anything before this. He's very direct, and he knows what he wants. He's he's very articulate when he wants to be, and very crass and funny when he wants to be. I know people. There's some people who think have very low opinions of him, but consistently for all the time that we've known each other, he has remained completely true to the core principles of self-sovereignty, privacy, and cutting out middlemen. I mean, all the things that he says were explicit goals. I mean, I mentioned that there were a whole bunch of rules changes sort of through the progression of Hex, and it was very important to him to remain true to those things and fairness. The specific thing I was thinking of was the 1000x, 500x, the system that we had before that very unfairly or unevenly rewarded people who heard about the project, a day earlier. That was a blocker. Like, he was not going to launch the project if that were the case. It had to be a fair system that was provably honest and allowed self-sovereignty and control over things. No humans. Every project that he and I have talked about coming along afterwards, every critique that we have of other DeFi projects starts with, there's admin keys, there's people. Like that's not the core principle of cryptocurrency, self-sovereignty and privacy. So he's been totally great.
Nice. Wait, Patrick, do you have a question? Because I just forgot mine. I was going to ask.
Yeah, I mean, the last questions, how can we talk efficiently to no coiners when they are asking, how much will I get? Because it's like the main question we are getting with new people,
Makes sense. There's not a lot like it out there. I mean, the analogy that I would use, just to give people the right intuition, is that it's sort of like, oh man, that's really hard. That's a hard one, because anything I say is going to be a very imperfect analogy. I mean, you can talk about inflation because that's stable, and then you're buying into your cut of that, and then talk about the numbers. Like, it doesn't sound like a big number, just under 4%, but then you say, but that's on the entire supply, so that's a big number. And then if you have even a small piece of that much larger number, it can get them kind of in the right headspace, like it's the right intuition. So that's sort of the pitch for the product. And then I think they have to kind of buy into the pitch for crypto to begin with, that it's secure, because a lot of big brains have done the math to make sure that it's secure. And then talk about personal responsibility. If they're the kind of person who wants curated services, like they want to just be able to go to a bank counter and have someone solve their problem because they forgot their password. If they want to click a forgot password link, this just may not be the space for them yet. I mean, we're still not great at that, right? It's still a little bit techie centric. So if you can get them on board with the product pitch, and you can point to recent results and say, well, people can go a little crazy for this crypto stuff, and there's a lot of money to be made, maybe just a little bit of exposure. Now, it is a little rough around the edges. Here's like all the tools that we have, and they're not stellar. And that's where something like Staker or some sort of smooth user experience product is probably going to be the most effective thing, even if it's not making some kind of fundamental improvement on the original product. It's making an improvement on the user experience, which is probably by far the most important thing for no coiners, is that it has to mimic something they're relatively familiar with, and then just make them very aware of the sharp edges. Or like, there's no one to help you if you forget your password. So
yeah, that's also the reason why we are so focusing on the security issue, because I don't want to have people coming to me in some years. You told me about this hex and now I can't access it, and it's I don't know, $1, and so that's why we are going security first and do it like that.
yeah, and
And
that's tough, and that's why with that, there's because it's a moving target, and we're talking about things that are out way into the future by years. You just can't give bulletproof advice. But if you just say, for this, don't trust anything or anyone or any internet connection, you're on the right track. Because even if you just bury it in the ground and you dig it up later, it will still work. Your seed phrase.
Well, the last question from the people on the chat, because you don't have any more time, you probably have to work way more today. So I will just put it together. It's from 3 different guys, actually. Can you elaborate on the purpose of the AOA, and what did the AOA do, and what could it do in the future? I know this is all speculation, but could you talk a little bit about the AOA in short sentences?
Yeah, sure. I have a really hard time with short answers, but I'll try to give one. So so I mentioned before there were 2 premises or 2 core pitches for Hex. One was trustless interest. That was done through inflation. All the math is bulletproof on that. The other one is, what if you had a system that had programmed in a large holder? So one of the things that we have analogous in the real world is companies where founders have some huge proportion of it, and they do a lot to steer what the company does. That's kind of the analog. Tech companies are like this, sort of by and large, where you have one person whose name who kind of steers the company, and they're a large holder, so they care very much about the performance of the company. And that's the analog for the OA. Since we need this contract to be trustless and people will interact with it and it will just always do what it says, how do you make that in a way that doesn't have any special powers? Like, it doesn't have anyone that can do admin things. Well, you have to program in a way to funnel some amount of coins to a central or a large. They're not central because if they did nothing, then nothing would happen. Nothing breaks if they just do nothing. How do you funnel funds to this programmed large holder? And the idea is you're just creating an incentive. You're creating an incentive for the large holder to do price positive things. You're not making them do it. If they do nothing, the contract won't break. It will just do what it says it will do forever. But you now have a party who cares very much, or has reason to care very much, about the financial health of the project. So that's the second core proposition, is what if we had a thing, it's trustless, it inflates at a very known low rate, and you can get your chunk of it, and it will always pay you, and there's no problem. And what if this project also has a highly incentivized holder who has no special powers? They just have mechanisms that give them a lot of the coin, so they care if it's worth a lot. During the adoption amplifier phase, or during the launch phase, coins were funneled to this one holder, and it did some stuff, seemed kind of haphazard. I don't know if there was a reason for any of it. Seemed like it was kind of trying stuff out. And then in the future, it could do different things. We don't know. The other mechanism was through penalties, and there's actually been a lot of attention paid to this, that as sort of an ongoing mechanism, it receives half of penalties. Honestly, as you said, nobody really anticipated that the penalties was going to be a big thing. The fact that we had several events, like large penalty-inducing dump events, is totally caught everyone by surprise. So when I ran simulations, I kind of randomly had people do penalties, but I honestly did not think it would happen, really, not at any large scale. So it's kind of shocking that that mechanism even comes into play to me, but it's there. So, I mean, that's the only thing that it can do a little bit differently than you or I, is that if it emergency end stakes, it gets kind of a partial refund. the way that I've always thought about that is, one, it hasn't done it yet, so it's only a hypothetical. Two, if it did, then it's still paying stakers for the privilege of doing that, just not as much as you or I would. And I don't know if that's a good thing long term or not. It gives it the ability to do some things that you and I can't do. But it's not necessarily bad. I don't know that it's good. It's just possible. So it's one of the core propositions of the project. This is something that I always found confusing, was if you don't agree with those two premises, you don't think that's a good idea, then don't buy it. But it's not sinister. It's just, that's the pitch. So take it or leave it, I guess.
Well, great answer. I really got so much out of this interview. Really thank you for coming on this show today, Kyle.
You're
so
welcome.
do you may have any questions to us?
I don't have time, unfortunately. Running a little bit late.
But we will be
see you in the
glad
Telegram.
if you come back sometimes. It was a lovely time talking to you.
Yeah, it was great to talk to you both.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so thanks a lot, and all the best. Have a great day. All the best for your family as well. And always nice talking to you, and I hope we can do it once again.
That'd be great. Thank you again for inviting me. Take care.
You're welcome. I think, Patrick, we will go on a little bit more. Maybe we can put some emphasis on the viewers here on the stream, because we were not able to answer all their questions. I tried to slip some questions to Kyle from the audience, but it was
I guess the most important questions we already covered. If you would have some more questions, then please write it in the chat right now. In the meanwhile, during our talk, we had a dumper in Hex. So if you are looking at the Hex price, we are a bit in the red today. So for everybody who is looking out to buy some dips, here it is. Yeah. What else? So I don't see any new questions from the chat right now. Do you have anything else, Alan?
I don't know. I would just look through the chat. Let me see if I can scroll through the chat. No, I cannot scroll through the chat. I only see the newest questions. I think it was awesome to talk to Kyle today. I had so many insights from him today. The biggest one was I always thought about Hex something like static, but it's not at all. It's like really dynamic. I knew it is calculated on the behavior of the people, but not only that, in the background, like it's something you don't see is that it even projects into the future. If this person's end stakes today, he should not be able to gain the same share rate, even if it's just for one day. And this train of thought I haven't had before. So that was awesome.
Yeah.
So you guys, thank you for the lemons for everybody in the chat. I saw even a Ninja Genie was dropped. Is this right? Because I didn't see the picture. I just saw it in the chat. Can you confirm it? Did you see that?
Actually, I didn't see that. No, I guess it was a response from. Okay, yeah, two Ninja Genies. Yeah,
this is awesome because I cannot look at the pictures. You know, I just can see the chat, and that's why it slipped by to me. And I didn't want to disturb Kyle while he was talking. That's why I just had no chance to just say, "Hey, thank you for that." But I'm really glad and grateful for everybody who donated lemons. If you have any questions, you can just type them in now. We will just take a little more time to read the
exactly.
chat.
I would have one already. Will the current OA be have to pass down control in the future? Actually, no, because we already know from the videos from Silver the Antidote. So check out his channel if you want to. He is great when it comes to chain analysis, and he showed us that that the origin address is staked with 13 sub addresses, and in total it has over 380 addresses or something like that. And as the OA is also staked, but just by a small percentage, it will keep its power in the Hex ecosystem. Those 50% of penalties is just a small point on top of the OA's power. But yeah, you know, the large stakes I mentioned before, if they are like spiking the share rate a bit, which Kyle said yes, but not really much. Those stakes are the origin address stakes.
Mhm. And like Kai said, and we discussed this a lot in Discord Syndicate as well, the OA is actually a good player in Hex. And if you don't like the premises of the OA, just don't buy it. And we had another question that was like, what is the pitch for new people that come into Hex? And this is for me, it is buying crypto that you can stake and earn interest on it. And I wouldn't do it with any other crypto. You cannot do it with Bitcoin trustlessly. You have to give it away, but you can do it with Hex, and this is awesome. You could even do it with Ethereum. I understand that, but this is like way different than Hex. You don't earn that much interest, and also it's not meant to be like to make a high ROI for staking Ethereum. Is just to validate, and this has nothing to do with the staking of Hex. And if you don't like the OA, that's what I wanted to say. Just like Kai said, then don't buy Hex, and then you just miss out on the gains. That's all you know.
Yeah, exactly. And we also have another question, like when do we think Hex will make new all-time highs? I just give you a short answer. My honest personal opinion: next year.
Okay, next year, you know, this is only in like 29 days. We already have the next year, so
I know, and
probably...
then I have like a time frame of 365 days that I'm right, you know, and I'm pretty sure because I know like who is doing work in the community, who spreads out the message, who is doing videos, who is still talking to a lot of new people. It's not the thing, because a lot of people might think, okay, right now Hex doesn't has an onboarding program, doesn't give you like onboarding rewards like with the referral system we had during the launch phase. But it's not the truth, you know. Just look at us here. We are right now after the referral program. Right now we are getting even started, you know. It was never about getting refers or something like that. It was just to give the knowledge to the people, to show them Hex, to because the Hex code cannot talk, you know. So it's our job to spread the word, yeah, to inform you about this awesome design, about this awesome code.
Yeah, Tripod said you can lose Ethereum when staking, but you can never lose Hex when staking. This is a really good
So if
point.
you take care of your private key, you can never lose your staked Hex.
Exactly. And to what you said, Patrick, we are just getting started. I talked with Patrick a lot about the stuff we are doing, and we just started doing this English stream, and then we will continue with the English streams for like one time a week at least. And we, of course, we have our German streams as well, but we do not get paid from anybody. We just had an awesome experience with Hex, and we made some money, of course, and now we want to help other people to do the same. And we are just a little small community here, and people all over the world do exactly the same, because Hex is such a great product. They just changed their whole lives all over the world, and now they want to help other people. And I see this incentive in no other community around the world.
Exactly. So I don't see any more questions. I guess all the people are now thinking about the worlds from Kyle. He flushed us once again, you know, and I guess we have a good time. We gave good knowledge to the people, and yeah, I would say we are good.
Okay, nice. So for everybody, like us on YouTube, you can also give us a comment if you do watch this video later on YouTube, for example. And always subscribe to our Twitter, the KRYPTOSPARBUCH, and Abbott and Hex, and you will find our streams for the next weeks as well. And I say bye.
Yeah, it's EBIT_hex.
Yeah, _. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So all the best, guys. Yeah, have a great rest of the week. All the best, and hopefully we see each other to our next streams with our next interviews. And yeah, good. I guess